excited to have him on. Tonight we have Darante LaMar and his journey from serving as a leader in both charismatic megachurches and hyper spiritual storefront churches to embracing a life of secularism and reason offers a unique perspective on the evolution of faith in contemporary society. With a background that includes virtually every role within the ministry, Durante brings a comprehensive understanding of the inner workings of religious organizations and the impact they have on individuals and communities. Currently, Durante serves as the chairperson of DLDD World Group, a nonprofit committed to people centric progress projects and programs such as Sunday sessions, Bible study with an ex pastor, group therapy, and the ex pastor call in show. He is the author of 4 published books, including Significant, Parenting on Purpose, Memphis, The Last Supper, and Christ Held Up, as well as 4 upcoming books, Making the Jump, Give Me Freedom, Memphis, The Second Dawn, and The Case for Religion. So that is a pretty impressive resume. Durante, welcome to the show and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I am super excited to be here and very excited about the conversation.
I love it. Well, we are very excited to have you. I was so excited when Helen let me know that you were going to come on. So I cannot wait. And also, I cannot wait to read some of your books. You have a lot of books here. And I got to ask you up front, if I have to start with one, which one should I start with?
I would say Christ Held Up is probably the best one. That's my most recent book. Every book I've written since I've deconverted. But the first 2 books definitely have a lot of bathwater in them. Um, from just throwing the baby out, but I was definitely still stewing in the bathwater for a while. But Christ Held Up is the first book that I've published as an out of the closet atheist.
Oh, nice. Okay. Outstanding. Well, I am definitely going to look forward to checking that out. And I believe you may have provided us with links to those books. So
Yay.
I'm going to go ahead and drop those in here too. So, okay, here we go. And we'll have a chance to talk more about those later on. But I get excited about books. So I couldn't wait. Okay,
Car
let's,
has a Goodreads that they're never gonna finish.
correct. Correct. Every week, y'all give me more things to add to my Goodreads, and I don't read that fast, so it grows a lot faster than I cross things off of it. But I enjoy it anyway. Okay, and I'm definitely gonna look forward to those. All right. Well, you are talking to us again this week about secular community. And what I love about your perspective, Durante, on this is
Mhm.
that you come from a background as a religious leader, a minister, which is someone who is basically tasked with creating a non secular community, as it were. So
Yeah.
I cannot wait to hear about that journey and your perspective on how to create a community that is not a religious community. And would
I'm
you care to
curious.
start by yeah, oh yeah, go ahead, Helen.
No, I was gonna say I'm very curious, like, because it's such a we get a lot of people that come from religion, but it's very interesting when we get someone that was in a leadership position and then leaves religion. So I was just jumping on the back of cars saying, like, I am very interested to hear how you went from, you drink all the Jesus juice and now you're like, this stuff sucks. So
For sure, for sure.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit of your story if you don't mind. What was your religious background like and how did you get into religious ministry and then subsequently get out of it?
All right. It's a long story, and so I'll try to condense it. I'll start with I grew up in a household that I'd call culturally Christian, which meant we knew that there was a Jesus, we knew that there was a God. We went to church sometimes, but we didn't live by any of the rules. My grandmother at her little Baptist church, she's actually my great aunt, but at her little Baptist church, she was on the mother's board. But when she would go to church, she'd come home and say stuff like that preacher ain't getting my money today. So we were culturally religious. We were culturally Christian, but I wouldn't have described my upbringing as saved. My mother and father were never married. As a matter of fact, I don't even think they liked each other. I think it was literally just, hey, let's try this out for one night, and the next day, let's move the hell on. And that's literally how that went. And that wasn't very, it wasn't very odd. The majority of my family members, it was much more stuff like that. My father's side were American Methodist, African Methodist Episcopals. My mother's side were Baptist of the National Baptist Convention. Both sides were incredibly boring for me, and I was a very well-read child. So I had already kind of concluded as a child that religion was mythology. But then those pesky Pentecostals showed up, and they presented this God who actually does things today, and does things today in the same manner that he did things yesterday. And then this God just so happened to be able to cast devils out of my mom. And I was like, dude, if he can get the devils out of this lady, then he is worthy of all the praise, you know? And so, literally, as 11 or 12 years old, I decided to give my life to the Lord Jesus Christ because he rescued me from the demon woman, or at least so I thought. Because the devils apparently came back. It's apparently something you have to take a weekly prescription of called church. So I did started serving the Lord after that, as I would have called it, and I became very interested in knowing God and knowing the fullness of God. And so I went through a very quick evolution of realizing that the little Pentecostal church that I had gotten saved in, that these people had a form of godliness that denied the power thereof. So I moved on very quickly because I became incessant about searching out people who actually knew God. And I think like every journey that I went through, it's like, oh, but you don't know, so you just pretending. So you just making things up. So you just following your own ego. It became that, like, literally with every progression I would make. But I couldn't necessarily see it that way at the time because it also looked like promotion. On one end, it looked like none of these people know what they're talking about. And on another end, it looked like, oh, you're special. You're anointed. God is raising you. You have an eye that they can't see. And this is why you keep being promoted and promoted and promoted. And so for the first 10 years of my involvement, because after I got saved, I got immediately involved. First 10 years of my involvement, I was hyper spiritual. I was casting out devils. I was laying hands on the sick, claiming they were healed. I was definitely a tongue talker, and you had to speak in tongues to be saved. And if you didn't speak in tongues, I was going to be the one to help you get there. And
Can you
I
still do it?
oh, I can, and I'm very good at it, as a matter of fact.
I'll be
Would
impressed.
you care to give us a demonstration and then
I don't
explain how it
I
works?
don't mind at all because this was okay. So just a little demonstration. I think because anybody could literally do it because it's just gibberish. It's literally gibberish. It's learned behavior. And I've seen this in several different denominations. And the thing is, it can be helpful gibberish. In the same way that just going for 5 minutes can help you clear the mind, that type of gibberish can do that in that sense. But for a long time, I felt like that was a heavenly language, that was something that God had given me, and that this, made me closer to God. For about 10 years, I felt that this was like a superpower. I mean, a lame superpower, but a superpower nonetheless. But I think within the last 10 years of me being involved, I started realizing that, oh, this is gibberish. And I kind of rationalized it as, oh, this is gibberish that God uses. This is a way to clear your mind of just natural human stuff and get to the divine spiritual side. And then eventually I just got to the point where it's like, oh no, there is no divine spiritual side. But what helped me get there was being a part of the healing movement, and just being very hyper spiritual. Because I remember doing revivals where I'd lay hands on people and they would say they were healed, and everything, it would be so sensational. It's just like, oh, this is amazing. Because I think what the dichotomy that people don't understand is that the preacher is just as influential or influenced as the believer, as the other person is. And so when I lay my hands on somebody and they say, I feel something, I'm like, oh crap, you do? It must be working, you know? And so then our both of our faith is being uplifted at that moment. But I'd always have questions after that I noticed that some of my other contemporaries didn't have. For example, I remember two young boys coming up at one point who both had cast on, and I prayed for them, and they ripped the cast off, and they, everybody in the church goes, "Oh, it's a miracle." And I remember sitting in my car that night saying, "But I don't know how long they had those cast on. I didn't actually speak to the doctors. This could have been the week that they were supposed to come off. Last week could have been the week that they were supposed to come off. For all I know, there's so much about this story that I don't know. And I think it was because I wanted to believe that God was doing these things. It wasn't that I was trying to question God at that moment. I wanted to make sure that what I was doing was in alignment with that. And then that ended up leading to a string of questions about, well, holy crap, what about the people that didn't get healed? And that, like, it ripped me up so much that I decided to stop doing that. So I often describe my whole journey with Christianity as a journey of deconstruction, because the whole process I was trying and I was believing and I'd apply my faith, but the moment I'd realize something wasn't working, I'd kind of pull away from it. But I just assumed that we all had a misunderstanding. God doesn't work that way. Literally, I came to the conclusion that I would never tell anybody that God heals anybody again. That if God was going to heal somebody, he'd have to do it on his own word, on his own dime, and on his own accord. Because I started thinking about the amount of people who were leaving my services who did not get a miracle and who would now feel condemned or convicted because I said God is here to heal everybody. And I was like, I can't use my words to do that anymore. So for the final 10 years of ministry, I became much more of an urban type of seeker friendly type of preacher, where we still had the personality and the performance of the charismatic churches, but the spiritual stuff was more of an undertone than an overtone. So if you felt something spiritual, good for you. It wasn't going to be a focus, because we didn't want to make anybody else feel like they were less than you, nor did we want to prop anybody else up for feeling spiritually superior. But even after that, even after kind of conforming in that way, taking what I would call a more safer approach to religion, and that is, I'm not going to make any promises that I can't verify. So stop prophesying, stop healing, stop casting out devils. I remember doing an exorcism at one point and literally thinking, this person might have a mental illness and I may be exasperating it. And it was wrestling with those type of things that's like, oh, this is irresponsible. But even after becoming the more urban centric pastor, I think this is what actually caused the most damage to my faith for me. Because at this moment, I'm no longer focused on the spiritual things. I'm having to focus on the practical things. I'm focusing on the amount of people who can't pay their bills week to week. I'm focusing on the amount of people who are stuck in abusive relationships, and I'm feeling torn of whether or not to tell them to stay in the marriage because God hates divorce, or you need to figure out what's best for you. I'm also torn with telling people that, hey, the job you have is sinful and you need to stop it, and then watching them go out and stop doing whatever they're doing and then go work McDonald's and then get just as disrespected by everybody else. There was so much nuance involved in pastoring people without that spiritual veil that it became hard to ignore the problems. It became hard to ignore the fact that I was watching religion tear families apart when a family member identified as something different, whether that something different was a different denomination, a different gender, different sexuality, whatever it was, it became heartbreaking. I watched my own church when I hired a man who was apparently gay, but not out of the closet, but just apparently gay, and I watched my membership drop by 46% within 3 weeks, just because we hired an apparently gay man in the music
Wow.
department. And it broke my heart even more, because after seeing that, I had humanized every other sin in my church except for any sin that dealt with same gender loving or different gender loving that was outside of what we would have considered the status quo. And these things begin to bother me. And then Mike Brown and Trayvon Martin happened. And I had to pay close attention to the church's response. Um, Around the same time, my church had did a gas giveaway, and it was supposed to be like the biggest thing. We had literally shut our city down. And I was really proud of it until a little old lady came up to was coming up to bring her car to the pump, and she had ran out of gas, and we had to push her car to the pump, and she started crying, and our people helped us. And normally this is a really good thing because that means everybody sees that what we did is important. From a pastoral perspective, this looks excellent. The news is there. They have the old lady crying. They have my members seeing the impact we're making. And then I remember sitting there, especially against the backdrop against Mike Brown and Trayvon Martin, thinking, this lady is going to need gas again tomorrow. We just and if this is such a sincere need for her that she brought her car up here, damn near out of gas, and is literally in tears over $20 in gas. I felt like crap at that moment. I didn't feel good. I didn't feel awesome. I felt like I think we just teased these people on pretending to solve a problem that we were never actually intent on solving. What we just did here was create an opportunity for people to see that we are loving and market our church. And then I had to realize, like, holy crap, that's the whole fucking gospel. It's just marketing the church, not solutions. Because I'm like, I can get you saved, but saved from what? It's not going to keep somebody from gunning you down in the street. It's not going to keep somebody from devaluing you because you don't make enough money. It's not going to keep somebody from dehumanizing you because you identify as something differently. And at that moment, I had just kind of a complete crisis of faith where it became that the very thing that I got into this thing to do, which was to change lives and to build communities, is not what this vehicle is best equipped to do. And at that moment, I had over 20 years of experience to reflect upon, to verify that I had come to the accurate conclusion. I'll wrap up there.
Well,
Wow. Yeah. Go ahead, Helen.
I was just gonna say the last point you made reminds me of like, pregnancy centers, which is not about helping, people that, are low income, because usually these are the people that are going to clinics,
Mhm.
needing, healthcare services, and they are basically putting a Band-Aid on, a much larger problem,
Yep.
and that example that you give, that it's not actually about helping the person, it's about the ministry. Where's the money going to come from? Like, look, we're such benevolent people, we're
Yep.
following the world of God. But really, like, you're like, there's a bleeding wound, and I'm like, no, I put it, look at, I put a Band-Aid on it. like
Yep.
like yeah, I'm such a good person. And that's also the problem, we talk about with religion, is that it doesn't offer solutions. It just offers, band-aids and DVDs and things that feel profound and feel like they're loving. But, if you look at the long-term impact, it's nothing. So, I really appreciate you talking about that and realizing it as a person, that you're like, oh shit, like, I'm not practicing what I'm preaching.
Yep.
Oh dear. So, and I think that's a very mature and intellectually honest thing to say. And it's admirable. So, just having a moment.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's something that some people were mentioning in the chat as you were
Yeah.
talking too, that it sounded like you were being very intellectually honest and asking the
Yeah.
tough questions rather than just going along and assuming, oh well, I guess it's fine, and not worrying about any of the outcomes for any of these people. And that was not what you were doing, which I also think that's admirable. But so you got to the point where you had this crisis of faith and you realized this is not for me. This isn't what I thought it was. I don't think I'm really doing good here. Um, and I guess you decided then to leave the ministry. But tell us about that. Was that a difficult decision once you came to that conclusion, or were you just was it kind of like, okay, I know what I need to do. I'm leaving now.
Man, it was the decision was not difficult. Coming to the decision was, right? um I was married at the time with two kids, my two sons who are the absolute sunshines of my life. And my marriage was in shambles. And I remember reaching out to my mentor at the time, telling him that, like, hey, my faith is not where it used to be. My marriage has been struggling. We had been married for 8 years. My marriage has been struggling for 7 years and 11 months. Um, and so I said, I've done everything I can to live my life by God's standard, and I'm looking around. My whole life is a wreck. And at that time, my youngest son, I'm sorry, my oldest son had come to me and he had asked me, just, and at the time he had to be like 4 or 5. And he was just like, "Well, when are you and mom getting a divorce? And when that happens, where will you live?" And that kind of caused a little kind of broke up some dissonance within me, because my whole idea was we were preserving the marriage because this is what God wants us to do and God is going to work a miracle. And at that moment I realized that, holy crap, my 4 or 5 year old son can realize that there's something wrong with this. And is this really the example that I want to lead for him? Do I want him to think that this is what a loving, or healthy relationship looks like? And I remember calling my mentor, asking him about it, because I wasn't ready to tell him that, hey, I don't believe this anymore and that I'm completely separated from it. And so I think this was a safer conversation for me to say that, hey, I think this marriage is not working and I need to divorce. And I had no intentions of telling him that I no longer believed in God. But then he said, no offense, but God doesn't give you permission to divorce. And at that moment, I guess because I had already come to those conclusions that, like, hey, I followed God for like 2 decades. I am broke. I am pitiful. I am pathetic. I am not able to take care of my own children. And much of that is because I've sacrificed my own humanity for this alleged divinity. At that moment, that statement for the first time in my life was offensive to me. I was 100% offended that you would tell me that some imaginary being has a greater right to determine my life decisions. So after that, it was easy. It was easy as hell, because it was an epiphany for me that, oh, that's what's been wrong with my life the whole time. I've been listening to people and taking advice from people who have freaking imaginary friends. And I need to stop that. So I got up from the children's table that day and have not looked back since. It was easy after that.
I love that. Amazing. I kind of thought that's what you were gonna say hearing you talk about it. It sounded like you had gone through so much thinking and realizations that by the time you got there, you were done with it. Oh, that's fantastic. Okay, so then now you're in this situation where you're no longer in the ministry and your 2 decades of your life, you said, had been devoted to kind of organizing community for Jesus or, however you wanna think about it, and, now you're out of that, you're not doing that anymore. What I guess where did you see yourself going next? Did you have a plan that you were gonna, "Okay, I'm gonna get out and I am gonna help people build community in a non-religious setting," or is that something that kind of arose later?
It took me quite a few years to get to that place. I was sure I was an atheist, and I kind of described my evolution in 3 phases. At first, I was an atheist with a Christian heart, which means I was an atheist. I felt like the practice of religion was bad, but I still felt like Christians had good ideas. and that I could still somehow be an atheist and exist in the Christian world and maybe help, like a Trojan horse. That did not work. All right. Just to give the Cliff Notes version, got arrested, ended up being homeless. Things didn't go well. Uh, Christians don't like when they find out that you don't actually believe what they believe. And the way that I rationalized this at the time was, Durante, you could still do this. I have a background in acting and performance. And so I'm like, if somebody asked me to sing Aladdin, A Whole New World, I'd sing it. I have no problem with singing that. I don't believe in Aladdin. I don't believe in the genie, but I can do this if I felt like this brings some type of community. And I tried to exist there for about 5 to 6 years. And that did not work. I could not exist there. At first, it was because it was hard for me to hide the way that I felt about things. But then it was just because the second part was because it got really aggravating to hear certain things. So like I remember one of my pastoral friends that I mean we've been good friends for a long time, and in he knew that I was on the fringes and reading different things. He didn't end the relationship. I did, because I no longer wanted to have conversations with people who believed. Our last conversation, we were on the phone. He literally said, "Man, do you ever think about how bad Noah must have felt watching all of those people die with the dinosaurs?" There was
Oh my
so much
goodness.
wrong with that that I was just like, I can't do this. I can't. I can't. For 10 years, I tried to live in the closet for an entire decade, from 2014 to this year. I tried to live in the closet as an atheist. I tried to find ways to be strategic, to be more syncretic, if you will. That's probably not a word, but I'm making it one now. Synchronistic, that'll work. I
We
tried
love
to,
new words here.
yay,
All
but
all
We'll
language
take
is
it.
all made up anyway.
that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. I found out it cost me dearly to do so, because in those 10 years, um, what I realized is that all of the support that I had before was illusional. All of that support was based on our shared story around this imaginary friend. The moment I no longer had that shared experience or that shared narrative, um, I was I was evil to those people. I was an instrument of Satan. But then the 10 years of me trying to hide who I was cost me finding new relationships, building new networks, building new friendships. Um, and so I learned a lot. Um, I learned an incredible lot within the past 10 years. Even though I was already empathetic towards the LGBTQ community, I became even more empathetic to the trans community during the last 10 years. Because for the first time in my life, even though, I mean, imagine this as a black man who lives in Alabama and has experienced discrimination and racism my entire life. Imagine for the first time in my life of saying, "Holy snap, I don't have a right to be me. If I tell people that who I am is something other than who they see me as, they will hate me, or they will try to punish me, or they will try to discipline me or make me conform." It became incredibly hard to have people who were close family members who knew I was an atheist and would come in my house and try to make me pray, and it really, it's part of the thing that shifted me out of silent atheism, was realizing that it's not just that this stuff isn't true. This stuff is a hindrance to us being humane to each other. And it's time that we call a spade a spade.
Well, I love that. Wow. I Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that is a great take on that. And once again, it sounds like you were very thoughtful and introspective about this, and you arrived at a conclusion and realized, okay, I've got to do something. And I love that you did, and I guess I hadn't realized that this was actually a fairly recent,
Yeah.
shift for you then.
Yes, indeed.
Wow.
So when did you leave like everything behind? You're like, fuck the shit.
2014 is the year that I became an atheist and stopped pastoring. 2024 was the year that I'd started letting everybody know that I am an atheist and I don't give a damn what you think about it.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you got to come and let people know on our show.
Yay.
Hey, just so you know,
Very
everybody,
nice.
Durante is an atheist. Just want to clarify that in case you didn't know.
Right. Okay, I think that kind of leads us into then kind of the meat of the conversation here, I guess, which is about the importance of having community even outside of that religious setting. And you kind of just explained to us how being an atheist in a religious community was harmful,
Yeah.
certainly not helpful. So why why do we need secular communities, explicitly secular communities then?
I'd say I have a threefold approach to that. And the first one is emerging non-believers need a soft place to land. And that is so crucial. There are so many people on the other side who have legitimate questions, have had valid experience that makes them question their faith, and they don't have the safety to explore those experiences, explore those questions. They don't have the safety to talk about those things because they are trapped in the echo chambers of not only their churches, because it's not just churches that reinforce superstitious beliefs and religious beliefs, but it's societal structures, whether it's family or school or even the shows that we watch. You know, when people wonder why are so many black people religious, why won't they leave this alone? I'm like, go back and watch the shows that were targeted towards black people. Which, and I'm not saying that it was conspiracy. Many of these shows were written by black writers. These were the black experience. So you can't find a show that went in the black community that did not hail the church as an important cornerstone. It's more propaganda than history for sure. But when people are having those questions, they have to deal with the barrier of, if they are a part of a church, they have to deal with the barrier of ministry, which means there are people who it is their vocation to keep people from questioning this. And then they also have to deal with the barrier of family, that if my family already identifies with this, the moment that I question this, I am not just questioning my religion. I'm questioning the sanity, the intellect, and the honesty of everybody in my family. These are hard things for people to come to terms with. And then, of course, on the societal side, when you live in a country that has this heavy propaganda of we are Christians, God is everywhere, all of our movies mention God. I grew up on X-Men, on Marvel, and Charles Xavier was constantly preaching. Literally, for the love of God was one of his favorite statements, and he meant it. Nightcrawler actually witnessed to Rogue and oh dang, I used to call them X-Men, but Rogue and Wolverine in a service and led Wolverine to the altar. This is how much religion has infected societal aspects. So then when you see yourself as the person who's unplugging from that religion, you're not just unplugging from an ideology or a belief system, you're unplugging from your societal infrastructure, your family infrastructure, and your community infrastructure. People who are experiencing that need a soft place to land. They need a place to safely ask those questions without feeling judged and without feeling like they're being used from the devil, because that's what the other people are going to tell them. The other people are going to tell them you're either wrong because this is a Christian nation, you're wrong because this is a Christian family, or you're wrong because the word of God is the truth. And either way, that's heavily detrimental, and we can put ourselves in a position to kind of mitigate that. The other thing is that as skeptics and free thinkers, we need a place to explore. Letting go of religion is not just a letting go, it's a getting up. It's a finally figuring out that there is more to life than what I've been exposed to. And I think one of the saddest things that I see is when people leave religion and still don't discover their own capacity. I know in my community, one of the things that I see happen oftentimes is that people leave one superstition and attach themselves to another superstition because we do not understand that religion didn't give us superstition. We gave our superstitions to religion. And so even when you leave the religion, you still have superstitions that you may believe about yourself, that I can only do so much, that I'm only so good, that I'm not as good as the next person. All of these things are bathwater because we need to understand that those religious ideals started as human ideas. Those ideas didn't come from a God because we don't believe in a God. Those ideas came from humans and then became deified. So at some moment, we have to realize these are things that we struggle with about ourselves. About ourselves, we feel like we're not good enough. About ourselves, we feel like we're horribly broken and that we need somebody else to save us. That's what we gave religion. And those are the things that's beyond religion. Those are the things we have to do the work on. So we need a place after we've set ourselves free from that, or even those people who've never been bound to it. We need a place to truly explore who we are, what we can do, to make mistakes, to figure shit out, to try new things, to explore new hobbies, because those are the subtle nuances that people didn't realize that church gave people. Church gave singers a place to actually be valued in their music. That's somewhere you cannot find that ability anywhere else in the community. It gave people who would never be hired as a chief financial officer somewhere, that gave them the opportunity to exercise their passion for money and get involved in a volunteer way and eventually end up building a career that's translatable. These are things that we need as a people so that you don't get locked into just the way the world is. And then probably the third one is that we need a place to build as people, secular, non-secular, whatever the fuck. We need a place to build. You don't solve problems from the top down, you solve problems from the bottom up. One of my biggest pet peeves right now is that so many of us have so many opinions about how things should work and what everybody should be doing, but so few of us are actually invested in testing those theories or hypotheses, if you will, with community. I have people who jump into my shows on Sunday sessions and say, well, it would all work if we all do this. And I say, well, why don't you find 20 people in your local community and do that with and prove it before trying to push it on everybody else? Because that's the religious bathwater that many of us are still percolating in, thinking that our opinions should take precedence over anything else, when the truth of the matter is this, and at least it is for me, where I've gotten is I couldn't possibly know enough to have the solution to the people problem. The only way we can solve people problems is with other people. We have to work together. So, and I think that's where secular community has the greatest platform of people pulling people together without doctrine, without dogma, and just saying, how can we help each other? Because we don't necessarily have to have an agenda. It doesn't have to
Mhm.
be, well, let's do this to push this agenda. It can literally be, let's just get some people together and figure out what we need to do to help each other, because that might be the best starting place. Maybe the reason why we're not working together as well as we should be is because most of us are still not as healthy as we could be, because we don't have the support systems and the community systems that we need. I felt like I talked a lot there.
Well, that's what
No,
we
it's fine.
invited you on for. And I'm
You're
loving
allowed to
this
talk.
comment in the chat.
Mhm.
Someone saying, not a pastor anymore, but he can still preach.
You brought up
I
an
love it.
interesting point, though. Like I found this in the atheist community where a lot of people, they give a lot of, I don't know, like they're very opinionated, and I know that we are. and they say like, oh, if we just did this, if we just did that. And I'm like, are you doing that? Or are you just thinking that if you just say it, all of us are going to fall in line? And I know that, from being an activist for the past few years, and, I'm sure Cars has spoke to this, Daryl, those of us that like getting atheists together is like herding cats.
Yes.
Because I think that for those of us that came from religious structures, like the idea of gathering and like doing things as a goal is kind of like, I don't want it to turn into like a religious thing.
Mhm.
And I think that, and that's understandable. I'm like, that's a very understanding and place to come from. But if you're the type of person that you want to see the change, you have to be the change you want to see.
Yeah.
So instead of waiting around, in your small town or wherever you live for that atheist group to start, it's like you might have to be the one to start it. It's
Yes.
going to take time, and you're going to have to, and you have to decide if you're willing to give the time and be a leader, or do you find another organization where you volunteer your time in another way? And I think that's really important too, to find out like what is your skill set? What are
Yes.
you willing to do? And if you really want to like be the one, like, okay, like I'm going to start a group, it's like, okay, then you got to commit.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that, instead of just going on like, and being in a chat and be like, well, if we all did this would happen. It's like, okay, well, good for you. You said something. Yay. Are you doing anything?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and yeah, I think that's a really good point too. And people do have, different levels of uh time that they can commit to
Yeah.
things and different kinds of skill sets and everything like that. But what do you have any advice for people who want to get involved in a community? What are some ways that people could try to get plugged in, either as a participant or do let me begin that actually with the second question, which I am known to. So let me know if you need me to repeat it. I kind of combine a couple of questions. But do people need to be more than a participant? Like you mentioned about needing a soft place to land after leaving religion. I'm sure there are some people that may be coming out of it and feeling kind of exhausted and not ready to take on any
Hmm.
kind of new project or leadership or anything like that. But do you feel that it is necessary for people to be more, I guess, active participants in order to get something out of the secular community? Or what are the ways that you recommend people get involved?
What I like to kind of highlight there is a popular phenomenon in church, right? So you can take a pastor who's incredibly gifted and very articulate, very charismatic, and you put him in front of 5,000 people, it's going to be an excellent service. People are going to just be like, "Oh, this is amazing. Oh my goodness." And you now take that same pastor and you put him in front of 5 people, falls apart. Now, that doesn't just work with pastors, it also works with celebrities. You take Beyonce, you put her at a concert in front of 50,000 people. It's the best concert ever. Put 5 people in there. All of a sudden, this sucked, That's how important participation is. So while I do want to advocate that, yes, we definitely need people who are actively involved, leading and things of that nature, we I don't think we value the participation aspect as much as we do. And so like I know one of the things that we try to do with our organization is we give people levels of volunteering. So you can volunteer at the driver level, which is 20 plus hours a week, organizer level 10 to 15 or 15 to 20 hours a week, promoter level 10 to 15, member level 5 to 10, or supporter level, less than 5, because that's something that church didn't do. And this is why one of the reasons I feel that secular community has an advantage, because we're not going by a God said. We can actually pay attention to people and say, okay, what works best for people. And so the thing is, when it comes to figuring out like how do you get started, what do you do, and what's most important is don't make this shit mysterious. What can you realistically do? How much time can you realistically commit? And what are you realistically interested in? I think one of the things that have surprised people over the years is that how many churches can exist in one city. Well, see, that's not just because the church is so divided, it's because people are so variable, which means we all have different things that we want. We all have different things that we value. Some of us are a little bit country, and some of us are a little bit rock and roll. And because of that, we like options. And so the truth of the matter is, you may create something that's really just for people that's just like you. And that's okay because there's probably some, for example, you create a community that's just around fishing. This is how non mysterious this is. It's because when you're dealing with the word secular, what you're talking about is everything. So when you're talking about secular community, if it's a fishing community, guess what? If Jesus is not involved, if Buddha is not involved, if Muhammad is not involved, it's a secular community. It's a place where people are free from religious oppression to actually explore themselves. And guess what? You start that secular fishing community, there may be someone who's deconverting and they got 99 problems, but fishing isn't one, and that becomes a safe place for them. One of the things that I like to remind people of is that there isn't a blueprint for a community. Communities are as variable as the people who are a part of them. The fears that we take in trying to, when we're thinking about community, I want us to understand that many of those fears are the superstitious bathwater. We're saying, I'm afraid that the thing I'm going to create is going to turn out like this. That what you're saying is, I'm afraid that I'm not going to be intentional about the community that I am being a part of. And there's an easy way to keep that from happening. Don't do it. Be intentional about what you're doing. An experiment that a thought experiment that I like to ask people to do, because that is the number one. The biggest thing is, I don't want to do anything that looks like church, which I'm going to be very honest. That's a very childish reason not to do something. That's not a very critical way to engage the world. It looks like church. I guess I'm not going to that concert. It looks like church. I guess I'm not going to court Monday morning. It looks like church. No, let's not be those people. Instead, write down the things about church that are harmful. Identify those things that are wasteful. Identify those things that are dangerous and say, these are things that we're not going to do, because the church is not a freaking microcosm. It is not separate from the world. There is nothing that happens in the church space that does not happen in any other space. It is literally, unfortunately, the only place that we have right now that is intentional, self-determined community, which means nobody else determines what that community is except for the people who are involved in it. And that is an incredible benefit for secular communities if we so choose to leverage it.
That was a great answer.
I try.
And I love the fishing example too, because it always
Mhm.
makes me think of people telling Bible stories and things. So I appreciate that being the secular community example.
You can be your own fisher amongst men.
That's right.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so something else that I know you mentioned you wanted to touch on, and I want to make sure that we get a chance to, is that secular communities have a responsibility to impact the world around them.
Yes.
Why
Okay.
why would you say that is? Tell us more about that.
99% of the homeless people and orphans in this country who receive help receive it from Christian organizations. That should be an alarming statistic. That should be staggering. At first, it seems like, well, no, at least they're helping. But let me highlight why that's a problem. I'd say, and this is a rough guess, but my background is sociology, so I think that gives me a little room with rough guesses. But I'd say about 50 to 60% of children who end up having to be orphaned, and maybe around that similar percent of people who find themselves destitute and homeless, no longer put much trust in the faith. And so you're going to find yourself, when needing help, confronted by people who require you to conform or to convert to get help. Now, many times when you're talking about the homeless, people don't give that much sympathy. But let's talk about those orphan children who, by no fault of their own, end up being adopted or fostered by parents who are telling them that if you don't believe that this Jesus, who did nothing to make your life better, that this Jesus, if you don't conform to this Jesus, I'm not going to protect you anymore. If you don't follow Jesus's rules, this help that we gave you, you're not getting anymore. I don't think we can sit by in good faith and watch these things continue to happen while we have every opportunity in the world to get involved and we're not doing it. These are real issues. When you look at some of the things that our country is facing in the US, you see real issues. I think it was Dr. King. I don't know if he was the first one to say it, but the only thing that it takes for, and I'll paraphrase, for bad things to happen is for good people to sit back and let it happen. And I think a part of the superstition that exists even in the secular community is that it's somebody else's responsibility. Whether that somebody else is the government, or that somebody else is the Christians to finally wake up, or that somebody else for the Muslims to finally make it look bad enough, it's anything other than us actually taking responsibility and becoming an equal partner in this world. And saying that, no, if Christians can organize themselves, and if Catholics or Buddhists or Muslims, which is mainly just Christians and Muslims over here, as far as organizing themselves, but if these other groups can organize themselves around causes that are only peripherally important to them, because to be true, homelessness is not an issue to them. People being orphaned is not an issue to them. People being not saved is an issue for them. They don't have a plan to solve homelessness. They don't have a plan to solve orphans or anything like that. They just have a plan to convert and to recruit as many people into retreatism as they can. And for us to sit on the sidelines and not find ways to bring ourselves together, because at the end of the day, community is not just about hanging out. We can do that. Community is about solutions. Community is about bringing ourselves together. I was writing this down as this conversation opened, that churches are one of the few places in this country where we actually practice cooperative economics, collective work and responsibility, and self-determination. There is no reason that the secular community should be allowing itself not to practice those things. If we care about the way the world is, we should be putting our money where our mouth is. We should be putting our work where our mouth is, our labor, and we should be putting our time where our mouth is. And the only way you can do that is as an intentional community. And it's not just about local intentional communities. It's just, if you have one, and then you have 10, and then you have 100, one community can't do what 100 communities can do. 100 communities can't do what 1,000 communities can do. National communities cannot do what global communities can do. So if we know that more communities can get more things done, why aren't we making it a priority? Because then we can offer more than help. One of the main reasons people stay stuck in churches is because they know when they're going to have hard times, they can't come to any atheists for help. They can't come to us to pay the rent. And I'm not saying they should, but I'm just saying they can't. We have no options there. We have no solutions there. And I'm not saying we don't have any, but we don't have enough that are out front. And that's a problem we can solve. And the tricky part is, and I'll wrap it up here, is that if we solve that problem, I think from a theoretical perspective, we'll actually see an acceleration of how many people feel comfortable letting go of religion and superstition altogether, because then we create it as a safe place for them. And right now, it's not what it is by far and large. And that's not because of anybody's fault. It's just because there's not enough of us out here doing it.
Wow. Well, I'm gonna have to say ramen to your your statements there. I think that was spot on. I really like that. And I think you're absolutely right. I kind of like how you've centered the community as having a safe place to land that people need before they're in many cases even going to be able to exit a religious situation that isn't working for them anymore. I think that's a
Mhm.
great point. I hope that I hope that we're able to provide some of that here, but I think you also make a really great point too that it can't just be one group of people doing it. It's got to
Yeah.
be a larger community and a network of people bringing various different skills and different foci to bear. We're just making up words here tonight. Don't
I
worry about
love it.
it.
That's added
I
to the Rolodex.
before we move on, I just wanted something that you said about these poor kids that are in the foster care and adopted children. It also goes the other way. Like if you are not a religious person, if you are a queer couple, if you are older,
Yes.
if you're over the age of 35, 40 years old and you want to adopt a child, you have to go through a shitload of red tape because again, you said a lot of adoption agencies are religious. If you're
Hmm.
an atheist couple, they're going to ask you, what faith are you going to raise your children in? And if you say, I plan to not raise this child in a faith,
Hmm.
you're not going to be able to adopt. Yeah, it's like, yeah, my to your point, Carr, like my brother and his wife, when they adopted my nephew, they were in their early 40s and they had to go to Guatemala to adopt my nephew because the United States orphanage system said they were too old. So
Wow.
it's very
Wow.
discriminatory. So
Hmm.
so if we're talking about like how do we fix these problems, it has to start not only within us as like, gathering together and like figuring out, what the problems are, but like what are people's skill sets? You know,
Yes.
do you have a background in adoption law and you've left a religion? Maybe you should start, an idea might be to start a secular adoption practice, under the laws of your state so people can adopt children and then more kids are getting adopted. And I'm just saying, like, not that I have any background in this, but this is just a thing that popped into my brain
Hmm.
about how we as people that not only when you become an atheist but you become skeptical and you look at the world for what it really is, not for how you want it to be.
Yep.
When you identify the problem, then you say, okay, my background's in this is what I'm good at, I'm going to offer this to the community. This is what I can do. Even if it's just like, at being here at RFR and, you're really good at website development and you're working on the website. It's
Yeah.
something that's contributing that's going to help others. Every little small piece you do is a step towards people finding community, and you being a part of the community and talking about what you do is more valuable than every than a Christopher Hitchens a lot of the times because it's always
Yes.
people behind the scenes that are doing a lot of the work.
Mhm.
And
That is
just to
certainly the
add
case.
there, because it's also our youth detention centers that are
Yep.
primarily Christian based. And many of
Mhm.
our prison systems are prioritizing Christian missionaries and evangelists to
Mhm.
come in and speak to those things. Our AA systems, our NA systems, many of these are religious based behind this, which I would say probably speaks to the high recidivism of many of these programs. Because you're not helping these people critically engage the issues at all. And these are ways that secularism, humanism could arise as a much needed solution, but it's not something that we can project. It's something that we're going to have to experiment with in communities. It's something that we're going to have to get together with and break away from that fear of failure and just try some things until we figure out what's actually helpful for people. And while doing that, bringing our resources together and saying, hey, there might be enough of us to make a difference here. There might be enough of us to start a building. There are to purchase a building. There might be enough of us to start a thrift store. There might be enough of us to start a food supply center. The options are limitless, and nobody's group has to look like anybody else's group, as long as once that thing starts kicking off like wildfire, it spreads like the church does. And next thing you know, there's one on every corner. And in these cases, I think if there's a secular community on every corner that's willing to embrace people of all lifestyles, all creeds, of all backgrounds, and just help people be the best that they can be, I cannot see a world where that would be a bad thing.
I love that. I think that is a great thought to end on as
Yeah.
well and go to Q&A. Uh, well, and before we do that, where can people find you and your work and perhaps get involved with any projects that you have going on?
I am currently on YouTube. That's pretty much my number one platform, and you can really find me by my name, Darante LaMar. That Lamar is my middle name. Martin's my last name. But if you type it in either way, anywhere, even if you spell it wrong, you're gonna find me because it's so unique. But yes, definitely on YouTube. We have several shows right now. We do Sunday sessions where we really just have community conversations. We have group therapy where we have some of the harder conversations, with the whole idea that we're responsible for each other. Let's help each other make it through. We've actually launched the Ex Pastor Call In Show, which was inspired by being on Skeptic Haven with Dr. Darrell a few months ago, 3 months ago. There was a
Yay.
call we got on that show where I realized, like, oh snap, these pastoral aspects of who I used to be still hold some value and could still translate very well into the community. So I had another friend who was also an ex-pastor and said, hey, let's see if we can do our pastor thing from a heathen perspective and see how that goes. And it went very well. And we also do Bible study with an ex-pastor, which is definitely more therapeutic. I'm walking people through from Genesis to Revelations, with kind of sharing with them what I thought when I was a believer and what I think now. And then you can find me on Amazon. But yeah, I'm out here.
Also subscribe to his
Awesome.
TikTok channel. It's fun.
Oh yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a friend. Subscribe
Yay.
to talk for the one time a week I go on TikTok. I scroll through videos.
I love it. Yeah, and I've dropped all those links that you provided us in the chat, and we'll put them in the show description as well so people can go find your stuff. It sounds like you've got a lot of cool stuff, and the ones I have seen have been pretty cool, so
Well,
I
thank you.
recommend it. All right, well, let's go to questions. We've got quite a few. Let's see here. We'll get through as many as we can before we go to the hangout. And we'll also do the poll results. Y'all don't let me forget to share the poll results
Why don't we do the
after
poll
the
results
question.
first, then we'll go into Q&A.
We can do that.
I think
We
we
are
should get
not
that.
we are not following a divinely mandated blueprint
Oh,
here.
well, listen, as resident goddess Helen, I give the
Yes.
divine command that we do the poll results first, and then we go
Well,
to Q&A.
Then we must. Goddess Helen has demanded it. So
I have demanded
here,
it. Give me your
here they
firstborn
are.
children.
Yes. So these are the answers to the questions. The first question was, what is most important to you in a secular community? And it was one where people could pick more than one answer, and several people did. So you'll notice it adds up to more than 100%. But 70% of people selected regular meetings, virtual or in person. And 57% of people selected feeling supported, were the most important things. Some other ones, 65% of people said friendship was a major one. Let me see, what was the next one? The next most important one was safety and acceptance at 43% of people picking that one. And then we had, let's see, activism and helping people was important for 33%, or was the most important thing. Philosophical, moral, and ethical framework was selected by 28% of people. 22% selected access to information or charitable resources. 7% selected programs for families and children, and then 2% of people picked something else. And I didn't notice if it was mentioned in the chat, but feel free to drop it in there now. If you picked something else, let us know what that something else was. But it sounds like for a lot of people, we hit their main concerns. So that's interesting. Any thoughts on those selections, Durante?
Actually, yeah. The friendship aspect, just seeing the high numbers of that, it reminds me of how often we take for granted that people who are not in charge of their finances and can just travel the world and go visit places. Our friends are totally based on convenience or totally based on circumstances. It's where I meet you at. And once you're out of school, college or high school, that limits your friendship making opportunities because typically, unless you're just a social butterfly, when you go to places like the restaurant or a game or anything like that, you're going with your group that you're going with, and you're the in group. And so I can see how church served as a place where friendships that would not have normally happened actually happen. And so that's definitely another highlight of why we need community.
Yeah, I love that. I know I've gotten to make some really good friends here. I was just at Helen's house last week, and we met here through RFR. So, yay, you get to meet
Awesome.
cool
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. Like, and I can say, like, for my, like, I have, core friends that I'm friends with it, where I live. Probably got to meet some of them, last weekend. But I also like because I'm involved in the activist community, it's different because my atheist activist friends, we're all in this common goal, and we have such a unique opportunity versus like my day-to-day friends where we talk about D&D and talk about, like, what's good, Indian place to go out to eat and hang out and have drinks. It's you have different relationships for different things, and I think that having that diversity is also really important because it also gets you in touch with more people that aren't like you, and it gets you to open up your big brain and
Yes.
Yeah.
and form different experiences and form those bonds of friendship that makes life enriching, and it gets you out of the fucking church.
Also that.
Yes.
Okay. Let's go to the second question was how many secular communities are you a part of? And 18% of people said zero. And so for those folks, I hope that if you enjoyed RFRX tonight, you'll keep hanging out with us and keep coming back and get plugged into some of our other services where you can be a part of a community if that's something you're interested in. No pressure though. I know we do have introverts as well, and not everybody wants to socialize all the time. So recognize that. And 18% of people said they're involved in one secular community. 30% of people, which was the highest response, said they're involved in two. So that's kind of cool that people have already more than one that they're involved in. 24% of people selected three. 3% of people are involved in four, and 6% of people selected five or more secular communities that they're a part of, which is awesome. Wow. I love it. Okay. Any thoughts on that before we hear about people's Game of Thrones houses?
None for me on that one.
All right, that one's pretty straightforward. I won't go through all of them because several of these houses did not get a selection, but we asked which
Shame on
house you would prefer to be a part of in the Song of Ice and Fire universe or Game of Thrones. And it looks like the most popular one, okay, actually the most popular answer by far at 61% was something other than the 9 or 10 that we listed. So sorry, we did not capture most people's selection, and I would love to know which ones we missed. So put them in there again. I saw a few coming in the chat earlier on, and there was quite a diversity of them. So sorry about that. But the ones that people liked the best out of these choices, 18% selected House Stark. That makes sense. 7% each went to Targaryen and Lannister. 4% to Hightower and Tully, and everybody else said something different. So we'll work on our answer choices next time.
Darante, what house would you be in if you were living in Westeros?
Like, it's such a hard decision. It would likely be between Stark and Targaryen, and if I was a Stark, I'd probably be the Targaryen bastard.
Ooh.
Oh yeah, you'd be the Jon Snow.
Yes. I fully
To
support
answer
this.
somebody's question, which house Jason Momoa was in, he was a Dothraki.
That's
So it's
right.
not a house; it's a tribe of people who, which is also cool because horses. So,
Yes, horses.
Yes.
So
Very cool.
horses are cool.
Yes. So stick around after the Q&A session and we'll nerd out during our hangout and talk about more houses and Game of Thrones lore. I suspect that that is what will happen. But before we go to that, let's go to some questions. We've got a lot and we'll get through as many as we can. Let's see here. I'll go ahead. Oh, this is one that I saw come through while you were talking about your experience of kind of deconverting and deconstructing. And I thought this was interesting. Someone was asking, how many churchgoers do you think are closeted atheists that are just still going to church for whatever reason?
I think that's a fantastic question, and it's one really hard to quantify. And the reason I want to say that is because there is a large percent of people who are believers who do not believe. And what I mean by that is that's why we associate with faith. What the dissonance that's missed here is that what that person is telling you is that, well, it just takes faith. They're telling you, I have no evidence to believe this. I have no reason to believe this, but my parents have told me this takes faith. My such and such has told me this takes faith. What I advise people to do is that actually hold these things to standard. So if you hold it to standard and you say, okay, who's a believer based on the standards of Christianity? Who believes this enough to live by it? Not who believes this enough to tell other people to live by it. That's not a good measurement. Who believes this enough to live by it? Now, if you run that survey and you run that in churches, get you a sample group, I think the answer will be alarming. I think you will find that most people use their religion to control other people, not themselves, which already shows that there is a dissonance where this person doesn't really believe it. But to drive that point home a little more, there's a little experiment that I started running with people when I was deconverting. I'd start asking people, if you get to heaven and you could ask God any question, what question would you ask him? 99.9% of people would have a question ready for me. And so once after they gave me their question, I'd say, if you believe in God and you believe that God can speak to you, why haven't you asked that question already?
Ooh.
Ooh.
It exposes the dissonance fairly well.
Interesting.
Oh. Ooh.
I love that
Ooh.
question. Did you get any interesting responses to
I feel
that?
like I could ask that to a couple of family members. So anyway.
The number one response I get from that is an admission that's not quite an admission of atheists, but it's an admission that, well, man, God don't speak like that.
Huh.
And that's something that you wouldn't get them to say inside of a church. You wouldn't get them to say that if you had posed that question to them as an atheist, but for the fact that they felt that they were in the safety of the presence of another believer, they felt vulnerable enough to tell the damn truth. But that's something that I knew that would happen after years of counseling people who I saw on Sunday service giving these great testimonies, and then being on my couch saying, Pastor, why doesn't God speak to me? Why doesn't God answer my prayers? On Sundays, God is good. He's doing it. Won't he do it? He's working. This is what he did. And then that very next Monday, you're on my phone. I don't understand, Pastor. Why is God not talking? And so I think if people had the ability, the capacity, if they felt the safety to be honesty, if they felt the safety to be honest, I think we'd find out that there's a high percentage of people who are in the churches who are not believers. Because as we just ran that poll, nobody misses the bullshit. Everybody misses something that was very real and very tangible. That's there with the bullshit or not. And if those are the things that we miss, those are likely the things that other people are holding on to.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's exactly right. Excellent observation. I may have to borrow that question too. Love it. All right, Helen, what other questions do we have? You want to pick the next one?
Sure. Okay. Um, okay. So, what boundaries do you find help when interacting with others who are still centered on a religious worldview?
Oof. Okay. This
I
is
know I
part of the
got
reason.
heavy webby.
Yeah. This is part of the reason I decided to become a vocal atheist, because those are my boundaries. My boundaries is I don't believe what anybody else believes, and I need you to respect that. And not only do I need you to respect that, I will damn near require you to respect that. And what I mean is, and this may make me a little unpopular, if you insist on trying to cross that boundary, I will make you feel like the child that you are. I will expose you for being the child that you are. Because as a parent of 4 children who are all teenagers now, I realize that shame is sometimes a healthy part of the process. And you honestly need to feel shameful for trying to force your imaginary friend on anybody else. But so for the most part, I am I try to be hospitable to everyone, but I have one of my goals in life is to normalize critical thinking and to because past 10 years I felt like that I had to pretend to feel like something was wrong with me. I had to behave as if something was wrong with me for wanting to critically engage the world. And maybe like the negative extreme of that was been like, no, I'm not going to let you make me feel like this anymore. I'm unapologetically me, and I don't need your fucking permission to be me. I don't ask you to get my permission to be me, to be you. I'm more than willing to give you advice and tell you I don't fucking agree with it, but I won't try to control your life, so I won't allow you to do it to mine. And the
Mm-hmm.
moment I see people doing that, I treat them accordingly. And I don't let up on that. I don't give any slack on that at all, because I want you to feel like the jackass that you are. Like, if you believe something, that's fine. And then it's not 100% fine, but I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. But the moment you try to take that, this is no longer and put it on me, it's no longer a personal belief. It's a social disorder at that moment, and I like to call it out.
I love it.
Yep,
All
me
right,
too.
let's see. Let's go to another one. Um, So this one is asking, actually, two people asked this, and I think this is an important question. They're wondering, can you recommend any resources to learn more about intentional communities or how to create an in-person community?
Okay. I'm gonna suggest a book that's not actually a book. It's a manual, and it's very old, but I want to suggest this one for a myriad of reasons. But oh, what is the name of it? Well, you can Google it as the Black Panther Party Manual. And the reason I say this is because the Black Panther Party gets a lot of got a lot of publicity for a lot of things, but I don't think many people looked at their manual. And they really never got around to operating a lot of those things. But those were doctoral students in social sciences who were pulling that thing together, and they were being very attentive to things that communities were dealing with. I remind people that the Black Panther Party, when it was a thing, when it in its original iteration, was responsible for feeding local school kids, responsible for
Is it
providing healthcare services.
Darante? Is it the 10-point program?
That's it.
All right, I'll
That is
post it
it.
in the chat.
Awesome. Awesome. In that, they outlined several things that they thought were important. And again, I don't advocate any type of blueprint for community, for secular community, because it will always be based on the people who are part of your community. But I advise this as a resource to kind of look at that and see the level of thought that they put into it. One of the things that they were trying to do was something called the Son of Man Temple, and they had several reasons of why they wanted to do that. And this was all about secular community. Because one of the reasons the Black Panther Party isn't very popular in Black communities is because it was an atheistic group. It was a secular, non-believing, skeptic group, which is why they were a little more action oriented, because they weren't expecting somebody else to do it in some ways. But but the Son of Man Temple was intentionally supposed to be a secular congregation where people would come together because they realized that community was more than just about dogma or doctrine. Community was a place for people to come together and feel like people, to feel like humans. So, one of the things that keeps people in church is the feeling that something's happening. And that feeling is 100% biological. It's 100% chemical. But when you're experiencing in church, someone tells you, that's the Holy Ghost. Instead of letting you know, nope, this is an absolutely biochemical reaction that you're experiencing that we can manipulate at any time by either singing together or just freaking yelling together. We can, actually reproduce the same type of action. So I would say start there. And then I gave that one because that's the secular resource. The second one is read anything by Christian pastors on church growth. Like they're people. I think what people forget is that churches that have grown didn't grow because God did it. He's not up there. So these churches grew based off of very practical principles. One good book that is out there is called The 5-Star Church. I read it when I was pastoring. And it's not a book about theology. It's not a book about scripture. It's a book about paying attention to people and treating them well. It was a book that was criticizing the church for making people feel like they should feel grateful for being at your church instead of the other way around. That you should be grateful that they're willing to be a part of your community. And those are things that I think that possibly the secular community could benefit from. I think probably one of the easiest things that's come to me after deconverting is just pay attention to the math. Find anything that's working and study it. Anything that people are flocking to, they're not flocking to it in a vacuum. They're flocking to it because something about that thing is catering to something that they want. Whether it's something that they need or not is a whole nother other conversation. But excuse me. But that is something that we can pay attention to. Again, I say in these reigns, it's not very mysterious. Any book about people, any book about people groups, or just more easy, any place you see where people are gathering and are gathering on a routine basis, study those systems. Figure out which part of those systems are congruent for you and which ones are not, and then experiment with it. Because at the end of the day, there's not going to be a plan, there's not going to be a blueprint that you're going to feel 100% comfortable with. And even if you do, then about 60% of the people who are going to do it with you are not, because we're just that complex, we're just that variable. And so it's literally throwing spaghetti on the wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah, I like it. We can still borrow tools and strategies and things that work from our religious counterparts.
Yep. Because I will tell
Absolutely.
you, most of those the mega pastors, the fast church pastors, they're all using industrial organizational psychology. Now, they're not bright enough to know that, but they read it
One
in a
of my
book.
favorite things to study. So I was like, it all makes sense.
I feel like Dr. Ray may have some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, it's almost like someone wrote a book that I
love
own.
it. I love it. I love it. And just in light of recent events too, I wanted to just mention that even though we're talking about borrowing tools and tactics from other groups and things like that, we're talking about building community and not in any way, shape, or form advocating any of the types of things people are mentioning in the chat about, manipulation or
Yeah.
violence or anything like that is not being recommended here. Um, but we want to use our powers for good. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's see. Well, I think we are right at time. Do you have anything you want to leave us with, Durante, before we wrap up and go on to the hangout?
I would just say, first and foremost, thank you all for having me. This has been an incredible conversation. I always enjoy these types of things because they also allow me to reflect and to kind of reconsider, and that is something that I really like doing. But it also helps. It also helps kind of revalidate for me that, hey, this is actually a big deal. That community is a thing. Sometimes I go through this thing with myself where I kind of, I don't know if y'all saw the movie Beautiful Mind, but
Mm,
I
mhm.
often have to double check myself. It's about this brilliant mathematician that also suffers from schizophrenia. And so he's in his garage thinking that he's working on solving a very, very important problem. And it's actually just scribble scrabble. And so many times that's how I feel. I feel like I often have to ask my wife, like, is what I'm doing really important, or am I just beautiful minding right now? Is this just scribble scrabble and you love me too much to tell me, you know? And I definitely felt that way for the past 10 years. So actually being able to have conversations with people and people find value in it is incredibly healing for me. So this has just been amazing.
Well,
Aw.
thank you so much. Yeah, I am so glad you came and spoke to us. I think it's been fantastic, and you have so many good like nuggets of wisdom. I'm sitting here thinking to myself every few seconds, "Ooh, we need to take that and make a little short out of that comment. We
Oh
we
my
gotta
God,
gotta
we
highlight
can
that."
have RfR shorts and make Phil do more editing.
Absolutely, absolutely.
If you're good with
Uh,
editing and you need to volunteer, please consider volunteering recovering from religion. We need editors.
Yes. Help us edit our videos.
Yes.
Absolutely. And yeah, thank you to all of our volunteers who help us make this happen behind the scenes and in front of the camera. Thank you, Durante, for coming and sharing all of this great information with us, and everyone else who makes it happen, and everyone who comes and participates. And we can't have the hangout without people hanging out, and we can't have the Q&A without people asking questions. So thank you. You are all also participating in the community by being here. So thanks, everyone. And don't forget to come back next week, same time, same channel. We're going to have Mary Byler next week. I cannot wait for that one. The title of that talk is going to be My Savior Comes to Thee and Me. And then coming up in a couple of weeks, we have our very own Rob Palmer doing his talk on Are Humans Actually Special in the Universe? So that's going to be a good thought
Spoiler.
provoking one.
No.
Not special? What? Well, stick around and
Well, I
find
am
out.
special in the universe.
Yes.
It's debatable.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, I think it's going to be a fun talk for
It is.
sure.
It's gonna be a good time.
Yes. And don't
Yeah,
forget
we
to
got to
follow
stop
us.
talking. Rob just entered the room, so don't
Oh,
talk to
oh.
about him
Shh.
anymore.
Okay, sorry, Rob. We're not
He's
gonna talk about your
here.
talk anymore.
I love it. I can't wait. Oh, it's going to be great. And don't forget to follow us on all of the social medias. We are on Facebook. We have a main page as well as a support group page. We're on X, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and you can find the recordings of the previous episodes of RFRX on YouTube and also wherever you get your podcasts. So if you use any of those platforms, please go in there and give us a follow or a like or a subscribe. And that too helps other people find the community and helps us reach more people who might need some of the services. So please think about that. And as we already kind of mentioned, but just to wrap up with, volunteering is something that you can do at RFR. And in fact, it's something that we rely on because all of our services are provided by and staffed by trained volunteers. And what we have learned is that healing can also come through helping others and being able to participate in those programs and services and help people get through a difficult time. And so a lot of our volunteers have found meaning and purpose through volunteering with us. So please, if you feel like you might have some time or some skills, or would just like to help out and see what's available, give us a shout. Go to our website, recoveringfromreligion.org, and you can go to the volunteer tab. And you can read about the volunteer sort of details and agreement and process. And you can fill out an application, and then someone will get in touch with you to have a conversation about what that would look like, and then you can get plugged in because we need help with all of the things that go along with running this community and this organization and all of the services, including moderating the online community, facilitating the support groups, editing the YouTube videos, answering the helplines, all that stuff. We need help with tech support and making everything work on the back end. So if you've got skills, and I know you do, we probably need them. So give us a shout if you are interested in that. And at this point, I think we have reached the end. Let's bring on Dr. Ray for some final thoughts. Daryl, welcome.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, Darante, I do have a thing or two to say about org psych. So when I heard those words, my ears really pricked up. You should send me your address. I'll send you a free signed copy of my book on organizational psychology. One of my two. I've got two books, but I'll send you the one that really you'll probably like. So I really appreciate everything you said tonight. I couldn't say ditto enough times. My tongue got tired of saying ditto tonight. We are on, I'm going to say 99% the same page, only because we haven't talked enough. There's probably 1% where we are on too, but I don't know for sure. I just really appreciated so many damn good ideas in here. I want to answer Scott's question. I don't know if Scott's still here or not, but there's two places you could go to get detailed instructions on how to build. And the suggestions Durante gave was great. In fact, I didn't even know about the Black Panthers, but I love it. They had a lot of shit going on there. It's good stuff. But if you go to the Oasis webpage, Oasis International page, or the Sunday Assembly International page, both those two organizations have very detailed procedures to go through to create a local community. There's no reason, if you've got the time, energy, and desire, don't reinvent the wheel. Go find people who've already done it and choose which one you like. I mean, maybe you don't like the Oasis model. Maybe you'd rather do the Sunday Assembly model. I don't care. I just say, go do it. You don't have to use the fact that I've never done it before as an excuse, because people have done it. You're not reinvent the wheel. And if you don't want to reinvent something, you can always find somewhere to volunteer, not just for us. I was thinking as talking about Camp Quest is coming up all summer. Every summer, Camp Quest needs more and more volunteers. And that's what makes Camp Quest successful, is its volunteers. So if you've never heard of Camp Quest and you kind of like that thing, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can go see what they've done. Maybe it'll inspire you to do even more in that area. My own motto is that activism comes from community, not from individuality. Nothing pisses me off more than an angry atheist out there, shooting off everything and getting mad and saying, I want to challenge this or challenge that, and doing it all by themselves with no backing of any group and not cooperating with any other groups. And before this whole thing started, we had a brief conversation, Durante and I, and we both agreed on that. Your activism is best fulfilled from community, not from your own individual actions. And even if you think you're doing all this shit by yourself, you probably got people behind you. You've probably got RfRx who's willing to send a letter for you. You've probably got the local group that's willing to show up at the city council meeting or whatever you're doing. you're almost never doing it alone. And I think individuality is a bane of atheist philosophy in some ways. I detest it because it doesn't get anything done. Anyway, I could talk all night, as you can tell, and always could. But I think one thing I want to emphasize more that what Darante said was that networks help you create communities. I mean, communities help you make networks. I don't think you realize it, but the networks are what really make things happen. I know somebody. When you say, oh, I know somebody in Atlanta that can help you with that, that's a network. The Baptist church has thousands, millions of networks, and they know how to tap into those networks. And the reason why Durante's idea that 1,000 communities do better than 100 communities and so forth is because then that builds bigger and bigger networks with more and more resources, more and more talent, more and more education. Somewhere in those 1,000 communities is somebody that can do what you want. And that's where we can really, really grow. Every time you create a community here, that community has tendrils or something like a spider web going out to all the other communities. And before you know it, you can get on an airplane, land in a city, and be able to go out to dinner with the community that's very similar to your own back wherever you came from. I just hosted the chaplain from Tufts University this weekend here. He came here from Tufts to speak at Oasis, the local Oasis here. I think Todd was there. Todd, are you still on here? Anyway, that came from the network. But more importantly, we had a little party here. And I talked about recovering from religion. And we had volunteers like Kara was there, Lindsay was there. We had Dan, we had 3 or 4 volunteers of RFR there. And they were talking and networking with these other people, with Oasis and with this chaplain. When he went back to put him on the plane this morning, that guy went back with tons of information in his head about recovering from religion that there would never have happened if we weren't networking across secular community lines. So I'm just trying to reinforce what Durante said. It is so important to create community because that creates networks that then have power to really do shit. One individual community doesn't have that, but together with others, it does. One of our values at Oasis is meaning comes from making a difference. That's one of our values. And if you think about it, creating a community, creating a network, giving a place for people to express their talents and use their education, that's making a difference. And anyway, I could talk all night long. I'm just